Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Have you ever felt the weight of prejudice, being treated as if you were nobody? Now imagine this happening to one of hip-hop's biggest legends, someone who built an empire and earned respect around the world. But that day, he wasn't a star. There were no spotlights, security guards, or fans chanting his name. He was just an ordinary man walking into a luxurious hotel, without knowing that he was about to experience one of the greatest humiliations of his life. What that arrogant employee didn't know was that in just a few minutes, everything would change. Because life has a peculiar way of teaching unforgettable lessons. Fate, karma, poetic justice. All of this was about to unfold right before his eyes, and when he finally discovered the truth, it was already too late. Do you believe that the world goes around, that sometimes the person you despise could be the only one capable of changing your life forever? If so, get ready, because this story is living proof that arrogance can be the biggest mistake anyone can make. And in the end, the twist that happened was so shocking that it left everyone speechless. The hotel was a true status symbol, an exclusive retreat for the elite, where only those who boasted wealth and influence were welcome. Impeccable marble on the floor, crystal chandeliers reflecting the soft light of the room, and staff trained to serve only the most selected. In the lobby, men in impeccable suits and women with shiny jewelry chatted in restrained tones, sipping expensive drinks and casting discreet glances at anyone who seemed outside the norm. This was not a place for just anyone. It was a space where appearances defined everything, where a simple look could decide if you would be treated like a king or ignored as a mere unknown. And it was in this setting of luxury and exclusivity that a man entered without rushing, without attracting attention. He wore simple clothes, nothing extravagant, nothing that indicated his true identity. But it only took a few seconds for the gazes to begin to weigh on him. Some guests whispered among themselves, exchanging judgmental expressions. The manager, who monitored every corner of the hotel as if he were a guardian of Olympus, raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the man's presence. And then one of the receptionists, with a practiced smile and a look full of superiority, straightened his posture behind the counter, ready to do what he did best, decide who deserved to be there, and who should be kindly asked to leave. The man walked to the reception, maintaining a calm expression. He didn't seem intimidated, not at all uncomfortable with the judgmental looks. For him, this was nothing new, but for the receptionist, his presence was a nuisance. The employee analyzed her casual attire, her relaxed posture, and immediately drew his conclusions. This guy can't afford a night at this hotel. He must be lost. Maybe he just came in to ask for information. "Good evening, sir," said the receptionist, with a tone that mixed artificial politeness and disdain. "How can I help you?" The man smiled slightly and replied bluntly, "I need a room." The receptionist held back his laughter. Of course, he had seen these types of people before. People who entered there, deluded, thinking they could simply stay without a reservation, without a credit card loaded with an absurd limit, without any sign that they belonged in that environment. He already knew exactly what to do. "No, sir. Allow me to check availability," he said, sliding his fingers across the computer keyboard, pretending to look for something, when in fact he had already decided on the answer. The words came out of his mouth with false sympathy. "Unfortunately, we are at maximum capacity. We do not have any rooms available at this time." Lie. There were empty suites, several of them. But for him, it didn't matter. The only important thing was to maintain the standard of the hotel, to prevent someone who didn't fit the expected profile from tarnishing the place's reputation. The man continued smiling, without showing any indignation. He knew exactly what was happening. Maximum capacity? "Interesting," he said, as if savoring every word. The receptionist just nodded, keeping his smile forced. "Yes, sir. We are very sorry. Maybe you can try another hotel, accessible a few blocks away." That last sentence was said with an almost imperceptible hint of irony, but full of intention. It was the last straw for some people around to start laughing discreetly, finding the situation funny. A non-standard man being put in his place, but what no one knew was that that man was Snoop Dogg. And what happened next would take everyone by surprise. There at that moment, the receptionist thought he was in control, that he had done his job perfectly, that he had ensured that that intruder would not tarnish the hotel's exclusivity. But fate has a curious way of turning the tide, and the lesson that employee was about to learn, he would never forget. And now, I want to hear from you. What would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Would you simply accept the humiliation and leave in silence? Or would you show that employee that life takes turns? Tell us here in the comments. I read everyone and want to know your opinion on this situation. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever been treated with contempt by someone who didn't even know who you were? Share your story here, because these conversations are important. And look, this story is still far from over. The receptionist thought he had everything under control, but little did he know that an unbelievable turn of events was about to happen. Fate was already preparing a lesson that he would never forget. So leave a like if you believe that respect has nothing to do with money, but with character. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next part, you will see the exact moment the truth came to light, and repentance was inevitable. You won't believe what happened next. The air in the hotel lobby seemed heavy with opulent luxury and an almost suffocating exclusivity. Every detail of the room exuded richness, velvety carpets, polished marble, gleaming under the perfectly tuned lighting, million-dollar works of art adorning the walls. The smell of imported perfume and expensive wines mingled in the air, creating an atmosphere where only the richest felt at ease. For anyone who didn't fit that mold, it only took one look to know they weren't welcome. It was exactly this scenario that Snoop Dogg entered. No fuss, no exaggeration, no entourage, no imposing security guards or paparazzi flashes. Just him, wearing comfortable clothes, a cap and sunglasses. For those who knew him, it was impossible to mistake his striking presence. But there, in that elitist environment, no one seemed to associate this tall, quiet man with the hip-hop legend, the successful businessman, the cultural icon. No, to them, he was just another one. And at that moment, something curious happened. What was once an environment of refined conversations and discreet laughter began to change. The looks changed. Subtle expressions of distrust began to emerge among the guests. Some frowned. Others, with the classic arrogance of the very rich, pretended not to see, but whispered among themselves. Who was that man who had the audacity to walk in there dressed like that? Snoop didn't seem to mind. He walked slowly, without rushing, observing the details around him. He had seen this kind of place before. I had been treated like this before, and I knew exactly what to expect. As he approached reception, he noticed the way the employee assessed him from head to toe. Not with curiosity, but with judgment. A look that had already decided who he was before he even said a single word. The receptionist adjusted his posture. His rehearsed smile appeared on his face, but the eyes said it all. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" The receptionist's voice was controlled, polite, but full of superiority. He had already decided that this man did not belong there, that he should get rid of it quickly, without causing any trouble. Snoop remained calm. His expression remained relaxed, almost amused, as if he was expecting exactly that reaction. "I need a room," he said bluntly. The employee blinked a few times in surprise. He was hoping Snoop would ask for someone, or maybe he'd walked in by mistake. But asking for a room, as if you were in any ordinary hotel, that caught him off guard. A room? he repeated, as if he needed to make sure he heard right. Yes, Snoop confirmed, resting his elbows on the counter. A good room, something spacious, comfortable. The receptionist quickly hid his astonishment and returned to his professional expression, but inside he had already decided that he wouldn't let that happen. Not in that hotel. He slid his fingers across the computer keyboard, simulating a search. But he wasn't really looking for anything. In fact, he already had his answer ready. "Oh, sir, what a shame," he said with a tone of false lamentation. "We are completely booked tonight. There are no rooms available." Snoop raised an eyebrow. He knew it was a lie. I could tell by the hesitation in the receptionist's voice, the way he avoided looking at him directly. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded, as if accepting the excuse without question. The receptionist, feeling victorious, continued, "But I can suggest some more hotels. Suitable, if you like. Something that meets your expectations." The way he said adequate made it clear what he meant, and some people in the lobby noticed the situation. Some discreet smiles appeared. For them, it was just another day in the elite world. An intruder being put in his place. Snoop just chuckled softly, shaking his head. He had been through this before. The world was full of these types of people, but what that receptionist didn't know was that that night he was about to learn an unforgettable lesson. And now, tell me one thing. What would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Would you insist? Would you confront the receptionist? Or would you just leave and wait for the perfect moment to get back at him? Comment below with the word justice if you think he should teach the hotel a lesson. I want to see what you think of this situation. But calm down, because this story is not over yet. In fact, she is just getting started, and the twist that comes next, well, I can only say that no one was prepared for what happened next. The employee thought he had everything under control, that he had gotten rid of an unwanted guest, but in a matter of hours he would realize that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. So leave a like if you believe that respect has nothing to do with money, but with character. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next episode you will see the exact moment the truth came to light. And the receptionist's reaction was simply unbelievable. You can't miss what comes next. The receptionist kept looking at Snoop Dogg as if trying to decipher who he was. But for him, it didn't matter. What mattered was the first impression. And at that hotel, first impressions were everything. He had already decided this man was not the type of guest they were used to receiving. It didn't matter his confident posture, his striking presence, or his calm demeanor. None of this mattered to someone who judged people only by what they wore, by what they appeared to be. The receptionist's fingers slid over the computer keyboard, but it was just an act. He already knew exactly what he would say. There was no need to check availability because, for him, there was no possibility of a man like that staying there. His tone of voice was rehearsed, his expression was artificially cordial, but it carried an air of superiority that betrayed his true intention. "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you, but we are at maximum capacity. We do not have any rooms available at this time." The sentence came out of his mouth with surgical precision, as if it were something he said every day. Maybe it was. Maybe that employee was so used to keeping intruders away from the hotel that he didn't even bother to cover up the lie. Snoop Dogg just raised an eyebrow. He didn't seem surprised. Quite the contrary, he seemed to be expecting exactly that answer. His expression was calm, almost amused. He had experienced situations like this before. I had seen this type of judgment countless times throughout my life. But even so, he didn't fail to notice the tone in the receptionist's voice, the way he avoided looking him directly in the eyes, the way he held the satisfied smile of someone who felt in control of the situation. "No room?" Snoop repeated, as if he was just confirming the answer. "Unfortunately, no, sir. We're completely full," the receptionist reinforced, folding his hands on the counter, eager to end the conversation as quickly as possible. Snoop Dogg smiled slightly and looked around. The lobby was busy but not crowded. He could hear some guests talking about their reservations, mentioning that they had gotten last-minute suites. Clearly, the information the employee had given him was not true. But he didn't say anything. There was no need. The receptionist noticed Snoop's gaze roaming the room and felt a slight uneasiness. For a second he seemed to hesitate, as if considering rephrasing his answer. But he soon recovered his posture, and determined to get rid of that unwanted client, he went further. But I can suggest some hotels in the region that may better suit your needs. Something more appropriate. The way he said appropriate was enough to make his intention clear. Not only was he refusing accommodation, he was making it clear that this man did not belong there. The injustice was explicit, and some people in the lobby noticed. Some exchanged complicit glances, as if they found the situation amusing. Others just pretended not to notice. After all, in that world, this kind of thing happened all the time. For them, it was just another normal day. But for Snoop Dogg, that was a different ball game. He knew very well the weight of prejudice disguised as formality, and he knew exactly how things worked in that kind of environment. The receptionist, feeling victorious for handling the situation, was already beginning to shift his attention to the next guest, when Snoop Dogg, still in his calm manner, decided to ask one last question. "Are you sure there are no rooms available?" There was a brief silence. The receptionist did not expect this insistence. But maintaining his professional demeanor, he just smiled and shook his head. "Absolute, sir. I'm very sorry." "Right," muttered Snoop Dogg, putting his hands in his pockets and taking a step back, as if he was about to walk away. The receptionist was already satisfied. Another problem solved. Once again, he managed to ensure that the hotel maintained its standard. What he didn't know was that, at that exact moment, he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Now I want to know, what would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Would you argue? Would you just leave and let it go? Or would you wait for the perfect moment to get back? Comment here with the word karma if you think he should teach this hotel a lesson. I want to see what you think of this situation, and hold on because the story is just beginning. The receptionist thought he had everything under control, that he had done what was right to maintain the standard of the hotel, but he had no idea that, in just a few hours, his life would completely change. You won't believe what happened next. Snoop Dogg kept his gaze fixed on the receptionist for a few seconds, analyzing every detail of his expression. The employee seemed pleased with himself, as if he had accomplished a great mission. His superior smile was discreet, but it was there. He felt in control of the situation. For him, that misfit guest was leaving without causing any problems. A problem solved. The hotel's atmosphere would remain exactly as he wanted, exclusive, refined, only for those he deemed worthy. But Snoop Dogg, with all his life experience, already knew this game. He had been in situations like this before. I had already seen the way some people treat others based solely on appearance. What that receptionist didn't know was that he was facing a man who built an empire from nothing, someone who fought against prejudice and proved himself countless times. But at that moment, Snoop said nothing. He just smiled. It was a subtle smile, almost imperceptible but full of meaning. It wasn't a smile of submission nor of acceptance. It was a smile of someone who knew the game wasn't over yet, from someone who knew that life has a very particular way of taking turns. He adjusted his cap, put his hands in his pockets, and took a step back. There was no anger in his movements, no haste. He didn't argue. He didn't demand explanations. He didn't try to prove who he was. He simply turned and started walking towards the hotel exit. And it was at that moment that something curious happened. The lobby, which had previously been full of discreet murmurs, fell silent for a few moments. Some people watched the scene from afar, pretending they weren't paying attention, but clearly observing everything. Others, who understood exactly what was happening, exchanged complicit glances. A couple sitting near the front desk whispered something to each other, and the woman held back her laughter. A man in a suit looked at Snoop Dogg as he left and shook his head, as if to say, "Did this guy think he could stay here?" The receptionist, still behind the counter, sighed in relief. He felt victorious. The unwanted customer had left without causing a fuss. Another normal day for him. But deep down, there was discomfort, because unlike many he had already kicked out of the hotel with this same trick, Snoop Dogg didn't react as expected. He didn't beg for a room, didn't argue. He didn't try to prove that he had enough money to stay there. He just left, and this was strange. Because when a person accepts humiliation without fighting, without questioning, it means one thing: they know something that others don't know. But the receptionist, caught up in his own arrogance, didn't notice this detail. He was already focused on the next guest, ready to go back to his routine as if nothing had happened. Outside, Snoop Dogg crossed the sidewalk and stopped for a moment. He looked up, taking in the hotel's imposing facade, the illuminated windows, the luxurious name shining over the entrance. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He knew it wasn't over yet, because in a few hours, that same receptionist who humiliated him in front of everyone would discover the truth. And his reaction, well, this part of the story you can't miss. The next morning, the hotel continued its impeccable routine. The lobby remained luxurious, staff hurried around ensuring everything was perfect, and guests ate their fancy breakfasts, discussing business, travel, and their high-end lives. For the receptionist, this was just another day. Another day, serving the right customers and ensuring that the wrong ones didn't cross the doors of that exclusive location. He didn't even remember the man he had thrown out the night before. But then, something unusual happened. The reception phone rang, and when answering, the receptionist noticed the tension in the manager's voice. Something big was happening. He was immediately called into an emergency meeting. The manager's serious tone indicated that this was not an ordinary situation. Meetings like this only happened when something really important was about to be announced. Upon arriving at the conference room, he realized he wasn't the only one intrigued. All the hotel employees were there, from the cleaning team to the managers of each sector. The buzz took over the environment. What could be so urgent as to bring everyone together like that? The manager entered the room, closed the door, and positioned himself in front of the team. His expression was serious, but it also carried a certain excitement. He cleared his throat before starting to speak. "Gentlemen, I requested this meeting because something very important happened. Something that will completely change the future of this hotel." The employees looked at each other, exchanging curious and apprehensive expressions. "As you know," continued the manager, "our hotel has always been synonymous with exclusivity, luxury, and tradition. But to continue being a reference, we need constant investments." And that's exactly what happened. The room fell silent. The receptionist began to feel a slight discomfort. "We have received an acquisition proposal," the manager announced, "and, as of today, we have a new owner." The impact of the news was immediate. The receptionist felt a shiver run down his spine. A new owner. That meant changes. This meant that someone with a lot of power was arriving. But who could it be? The manager paused, observing the employees' reactions, and then added, "And this new investor is none other than Snoop Dogg." Time seemed to stop. The air was knocked out of the room. The shock was absolute. The receptionist stood still. His face instantly paled. His eyes widened involuntarily. His heart began to beat faster, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He felt his legs weaken. The same man he had humiliated, who he judged as someone who was unfit to be there, now owned everything. The employees began to whisper, visibly surprised. Some expressions were of utter shock. Others seemed eager to see what would happen next. The manager continued, ignoring the panic visible on the receptionist's face. "Snoop Dogg is a brilliant businessman. He saw potential in our hotel and decided he wanted to be part of our history. He will make some regular visits to get to know the team better and ensure this place continues to run at its best." The receptionist felt a knot in his stomach. What did this mean to him? Would he be fired? Did the new owner already know what happened the night before? As he tried to process everything, the doors to the conference room opened, and there, standing there, was Snoop Dogg himself. The silence was absolute. With the same calmness and relaxed posture as the previous night, he entered the room, wearing his casual clothes, his sunglasses, and that discreet smile he always carried. But this time, the smile had a different meaning. The receptionist felt his entire body freeze. It was as if every cell in his body was screaming in panic. He wanted to disappear, because at that moment, he realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Now, tell me in the comments, what do you think Snoop Dogg will do to this receptionist? Do you think he should forgive or teach a big lesson? Comment here with the word justice if you think this employee needs to learn a good lesson. The silence that took over the conference room was deafening. No one dared to move. No one even breathed loudly. All eyes were on the figure who had just entered, Snoop Dogg. He walked slowly with that same relaxed tranquility as always, as if he knew exactly the effect his presence was having. His gaze wandered around the room, analyzing each of the surprised faces, but when his eyes finally met the receptionist's, he stopped. The receptionist, who until a few minutes ago was confident and sure of his place, felt his entire body freeze. His stomach was churning, cold sweat was running down the back of his neck, and his heart was beating so hard he could almost hear it. His mind desperately tried to find some way out, some excuse, anything that could minimize what he had done the night before. But there was no way out. There was no excuse. He knew that. Snoop Dogg tilted his head slightly to the side and let out a small smile. A smile that was neither angry nor satisfied. It was a smile of someone who already knew everything. From someone who had been waiting for that moment since the night before. From someone who knew that poetic revenge was a dish best served cold. He took another step forward and, in the same calm voice that he had used at the reception the day before, said, "Now tell me, do you have a room available for me?" The sentence hit the receptionist like a punch in the stomach. The impact of those words was so strong that for a moment he forgot how to breathe. His throat felt dry, and he felt his legs weaken. His mind went back in time, redoing every detail of the previous night. He remembered the way he looked Snoop Dogg up and down, the way he judged him, the arrogant tone with which he denied him a room and suggested he look for something more affordable. And now, the man he had treated like anyone else was there before him as the new owner of the hotel. Other employees also felt the weight of the situation. Some held their breath, others exchanged nervous glances, and there were those who could barely hide the tension on their faces, because everyone knew something big was about to happen. The manager tried to save the situation, forcing a polite smile and clearing his throat before speaking. "Mr. Snoop Dogg, it's an honor to welcome you here. As the new owner, you will have any suite you want at your disposal at any time." But Snoop didn't look away from the receptionist. The employee was still unable to react. He wanted to say something, apologize, try to reverse the situation, but shame and fear stopped him. Every second of silence seemed to last an eternity. Then, suddenly, Snoop Dogg let out a low laugh and shook his head, as if amused by the irony of the situation. He crossed his arms and continued, "Interesting. Yesterday it seemed like there were no rooms available." The receptionist finally opened his mouth to try to say something, but he couldn't. No words came out. But now, suddenly, "Is there a suite available for me? Like this?" Snoop Dogg continued, keeping his voice calm, but making it clear that he wasn't there just to accept empty apologies. The employee swallowed hard. His face no longer had any color. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, trying to formulate some response, but each attempt seemed worse than the last. The manager, realizing that the situation was becoming increasingly embarrassing, intervened again. "Well, Mr. Snoop Dogg, perhaps there was a misunderstanding last night." Snoop Dogg raised his hand, interrupting the manager. He was still looking directly at the receptionist. "Misunderstanding? Oh, then tell me." He leaned his body slightly forward, looking the employee in the eyes. What exactly was the misunderstanding? The employee blinked several times, his mind working desperately to find a way out. But there was no way out. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone in the room knew the truth. There was no misunderstanding. The receptionist saw a man who he judged as someone who didn't belong in that hotel and decided to kick him out. Snoop Dogg knew this. The manager knew this. The employees knew this. And now, the receptionist knew he had nowhere else to run. Then, with an even lower tone and full of meaning, Snoop Dogg concluded, "The truth is that some people think they can judge others just by what they see. They think they know who is valuable and who is not, but life has a funny way of teaching lessons." He took a step back, uncrossed his arms, and looked around, taking in the other employees. "I hope this hotel is ready for some changes," he said, before letting out a small smile and looking back at the receptionist one last time. "And I hope you learned something from this." The receptionist didn't know where to put his face. He wanted to disappear. His entire body was shaking, and he knew that his career there was probably over. The tension in the room was still palpable. The receptionist remained motionless, feeling small in the presence of Snoop Dogg. Every second that passed seemed like an eternity to him, and his mind was spinning in despair, trying to find some way to save his skin. But there was no justification, no excuse that could erase what he had done. He knew that his arrogant and prejudiced attitude last night was costing him dearly now. The silence was broken by the manager, who tried to assume control over the situation. "Mr. Snoop Dogg," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of nervousness and respect, "we would like to assure you that this type of situation will never happen again. This hotel has always valued the best service, and any behavior that goes against this will be treated seriously." Snoop Dogg let out a small laugh through his nose, shaking his head slowly. He looked around the room, taking in the apprehensive faces of the employees. Some seemed genuinely embarrassed by what happened. Others had tense expressions, as if they were waiting to see how far this would go. He walked around the room for a bit before turning to the manager. "Well, if this hotel values respect so much, as you said, I think some things need to change here." The manager nodded quickly, seeming willing to go along with whatever Snoop said. "Absolutely, sir. Whatever changes you want, we are ready to implement." Snoop Dogg put his hands in his pockets and looked directly at the receptionist, who, until then, remained motionless, looking at the floor. "The first thing that needs to change is this mentality," he said, his voice still calm but full of firmness. "Because the problem isn't just what happened to me. The problem is how many other people went through this here and didn't even have the chance to defend themselves." The receptionist finally looked up, his expression a mix of shame and despair. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Snoop Dogg took a small step forward. "Tell me something. If I weren't who I am, if I hadn't come back here as the owner, would this hotel be worried about changing anything?" The manager cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Of course, sir, any guest complaints are taken very seriously." "Complaint?" Snoop interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "This is not about a complaint. This is about respect. It's about not treating someone different just because you think you know who they are." The receptionist lowered his head again. He knew that Snoop Dogg's every word was an unquestionable truth. I don't want this hotel to be a place where people are judged by their appearance, their clothes, or what you think they can afford. This ends today." The manager quickly nodded. "Yes, sir. We will reinforce our training and ensure that all employees follow a more respectful standard of service." Snoop Dogg raised his hand, interrupting again. "I don't want a pattern. I want respect." Silence once again took over the room. The rapper then let out a long sigh, as if he was reflecting on what he would do next. He looked once more at the receptionist, who now seemed cowering in his own shame. "What about him?" asked Snoop Dogg, pointing to the employee. The receptionist swallowed. This was the moment he feared most. The manager looked at the employee and then at Snoop Dogg, seeming unsure of how to respond. "Well, sir, it depends on what you want to do. If you want, we can dismiss you immediately." The receptionist felt his body freeze. He knew that any other powerful guest would have demanded his dismissal at that moment, but he also knew that Snoop Dogg wasn't like any other house guest. Snoop remained looking at him for a few more moments before letting out a small smile. "I won't tell you what to do, but I hope he learned his lesson." The receptionist finally spoke, his voice weak and wavering. "Sir, I just want to apologize. I did wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way." Snoop Dogg just shook his head. "Don't apologize to me. Learn from this. Treat everyone well, not because they might be rich, but because it's the right thing to do." The phrase echoed in the room like a final blow, a lesson that everyone there needed to hear. The receptionist just nodded, unable to say anything else. He knew he would never forget that moment. The employees, previously tense, now seemed to reflect on everything that had happened. The manager, for his part, seemed more determined than ever to ensure that real changes were made at the hotel. And so, that day, a new phase began for that place. Not just because it now belonged to Snoop Dogg, but because the mentality of the people there would never be the same again. And now, if you followed this story until the end, I want to know your opinion. What would you have done in Snoop Dogg's place? Do you think the employee deserved a second chance, or should they have been fired on the spot? Tell me here in the comments, and to show that you stayed until the end, write "respect is worth more than luxury" in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye on whoever comments on this sentence, and I want to see how many people really understood the lesson in this video. And if you believe that respect should come before anything else, now leave a like now. This helps the channel a lot and shows me that you want more stories like this. And look, if you like this twist and want to see another incredible story of poetic justice, click on the next video that is appearing on your screen now. I'm sure you won't want to miss it. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and we'll see you in the next video.